friends, Christy Teji here, your host for the Productive Passions podcast. Let me ask you, is there something different you dream of doing but don't know where to begin? If you're feeling suffocated, anxious, or you feel there's something different calling you, come along with me for candid conversations with people who have embarked on a journey to put their passions to work for them. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Life is too short to stay stuck. Hi, friends. In this segment of Mental Health Matters with Dr. Diane, we dive into the complex emotions that come with friendship changes. Friendships are a vital part of our lives, but they're not always smooth sailing. As we grow and change, so do our relationships. In this episode, we'll explore the natural ebb and flow of friendships, how to handle unexpected changes, and the importance of setting healthy boundaries. We'll discuss strategies for managing the complex emotions that come with evolving friendships, from sadness and loss to the joy of deeper connections. You'll learn how to approach difficult conversations, recognize when it's time to reassess a relationship, and nurture the friendships that truly matter. Whether you're dealing with a changing friendship, seeking to strengthen your current relationships, or simply interested in emotional growth, this episode offers valuable insights for everyone. So come on, let's embark on this journey of understanding and nurturing our friendships in a way that supports our mental health and personal development. Stay tuned as we unpack the intricacies of evolving friendships and equip you with tools to navigate the changes with grace and self-awareness. I wanted to start out by reading this quote that I found. I love it. It's from William Shakespeare. It says, "A friend is one who knows you as you are, understands where you've been, accepts what you have become, and still gently allows you to grow." This quote really hits close to home when I reflect on my friends in my life, and I'm truly grateful to those who embody this for me. But friendships can have a powerful source of strength, comfort, fun, and stability. But when these change, when the friendships change, it can be overwhelming and painful. I've explained some friendships ending like a divorce, like going through a divorce.
Yes.
They could be super painful. And I found another quote that really struck me also, and I don't know who this one is from. It says, "The most painful goodbyes are the ones that are never said and never explained." Why are friendships so important, not just emotionally, but for our overall well-being?
Sure. We are all creatures of connection. Human beings, for as long as time, have always done well in community, right? Like we have thrived off of being in community for all the different reasons. Like if we go back into old school times when people were helping each other support as you're just building on the land, and you think about villages that are being created and helping each other out at the most basic level. I think of this in the hierarchies of, we've talked about this, hierarchies of needs. At the foundational level, we've always been people that connect with others. In a lot of ways, historically, it was like a survival mechanism to be with others. And then it evolved, and the survival evolved into like the need for connection psychologically, emotionally, and then also physically. And then it becomes this blended kind of mix of all the things. Absolutely, this connection is so key to who we are. There's so many theories on attachment as well. So we look at the psychological research that's been done by, there's so many different people where they looked at even not just humans, but like they tended to look to monkeys and apes and seeing like that connection of that innate connection of having the child or whoever it may be away from the family, and then that child finds their family even if they are blinded by it, they didn't know who they were, and there's just innate connection. And so it's at the core of us. It's not a survival mechanism. It's all those different things that I just mentioned. We are built on this idea that not one person can do it all on their own. And so this has been true in pretty much everything that we touch. Again, I was going back to like building villages, building communities, building a company. If you think about like all the different companies that are now coming up in the startup world, it starts with one person, but you must grow and connect. And so it's not just about the friendships, it's about just that general kind of foundation of connection with others that becomes so important for our mental health. We don't have the capacity to do it all.
It's interesting that you bring up startups because in my world, I speak with a lot of people that have started an organization, started a company, and a lot of times they start them with friends. So, whether that's because there's security in knowing somebody so well and that they'll support you, or just the interaction that brought you together as friends helps you be supportive in the startup world. How do our needs and expectations and friendships evolve as we go through different stages of life?
I think one of the topics that you and I touched on the last time that we spoke was values. And
Mm.
as we evolve, as we change, as we go through different seasons of life, sometimes our values change, which then equates to differences in who we connect with, who we find to be the people that are most important to us, for us to connect with. And so I see that evolution, of course. There's the evolution of people just being at different phases of their life.
Mm.
And so friendships can evolve out of just purely having differences and being able to connect at a more practical level. You and I very regularly talk about families. I talk about parenting and motherhood and all of that so regularly with my clients and even for myself when I think about it personally, where way back when I was, without children, without husband, without any, it was just me really. The friendships that I had tended to be with people that were very similar to my lifestyle. And so as my lifestyle evolved, where my time commitments became, I had to be thoughtful about like what my kids needed, what my relationship needed, that evolved too. So I no longer necessarily always spent as much time or didn't have as much time or independence or
Mm.
flexibility to go run off and go do something with one of my single girlfriends. I had to be thoughtful and a bit more strategic about it. You were saying this at the beginning where, it's not about the friendships somehow lose their importance, or you and I had talked about this before. It's not that they lose their importance, they just shift and they change. Although I might not spend as much time with that individual who's at a different phase in their life, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not important to me. We just spend different time. And then my kind of pride with people grows in that way.
What about when you recognize that a friendship has changed to the point where it may not be healthy for you anymore? Not because of anything somebody's doing, but maybe because the support that had been there before, the trust has changed. How does one go about moving away from those friendships and the void that leaves behind? Sometimes friendships change. As you begin to change and evolve, sometimes those friends that have always been there don't see you in the way that you're changing and evolving and don't see that as who you've been. In those circumstances, what do you suggest for somebody who's going through that? Spending less time with those individuals is something that you need to do to grow and to continue to be emotionally healthy.
Gosh, this is such a good question and such a relevant one, I think, for everyone. Where you said it earlier, it feels like a breakup. You go through this grieving
Yeah.
process. But before you even get there, this question that you're asking is just like, I think the question to ask is, how do you even recognize that that is a need to shift out of that friendship and move towards like being distant or giving more space? And I think this goes back to what we were talking about in terms of foundationally what our values are and being real with ourselves and being very mindful of the impact of that relationship. Because I think the tendency is that kind of similar. Again, I love that you're relating it to intimate relationships. If you had a breakup with someone, sometimes we grow out of love or we grow out of differences and preferences, values, how we want to live our life. And that's the same with these friendships where we can sometimes fall victim to just kind of being in that routine pattern with them because it's a familiar space. I think
Yes.
that's the important thing is to really be honest with ourselves about, is this a healthy, comfortable space? Or is this a comfortable space that I keep putting myself into that actually isn't supportive to my life? Perhaps it is draining energy that isn't helping me grow. They're, again, thinking about the way that they want to live their life just different than I am. I can't be as free spirited as they are or be as kind of impulsive as they want to be. And so that encouragement on that side is not going to be healthy for me because then I'm put in this interesting space where I'm wanting a more stable life with my family and this person's trying to pull me in a different direction. I say this with no judgment. Preferences are different, but when it starts to impede on your ability to grow as an individual or just live your life in a way that feels healthy and comfortable, I want to say it that way, that's when we have to pause and actually ask ourselves that honest question. And so I do think that it starts with that introspection first of the impact of these relationships on our lives, and then having to decide, does it make sense? It's not black and white. Do we completely break away from them or do we just spend less time? And so I like to think of it in degrees, as you know, it's never black and white. There's always kind of middle ground.
Sure,
But I
sure.
think it starts with that introspection first.
What about the feelings of guilt that sometimes come along with recognizing that changing the amount of time, the frequency of time spent with those friends is necessary? Because
Mhm.
that likely comes with a bit of feelings of guilt. Like, what happened?
Sure.
What happened that all of a sudden I don't want to be around this person anymore? I don't want to spend as much time with this person anymore.
Yeah. That's a really good question, too. And I think it comes back to kind of this basic exploration of how we're perceiving the decision that we're making to create distance from that person. I think that the guilt can be a lot of times unnecessary guilt versus being able to be honest with ourselves and feel sad about a separation, that we are just no longer the same people in the same friendship that we originally had. And it's less about having to settle into that guilt as if it's something. When we think about guilt, let me back up. When we think about guilt, guilt is usually supposed to be something that puts some kind of conscientiousness on us to say, like, we did something wrong, right? Like, that's
Right.
usually what the interpretation, and it's supposed to be something that we learn from. So it really is having to correct the narrative there of, is this something that I should feel guilty about? My conscience is telling me I need to do something about it and I've somehow wronged this person. Whereas I think if we were to step back, and as I was talking about the introspection, and we were to say, I can be in this space of radical acceptance that this person is not a bad person. We don't have a bad relationship per se in that way. I did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong. We are just different people in different phases of our life. I can feel sad. I can feel disappointed. I can feel a sense of loss. Those are not the same as guilt. It's working to make sure that we're defining what is going on in an appropriate way, and that will trigger a different emotion for you.
Wow, that's really helpful because as I was thinking about this conversation, what I really wanted from you, Dr. Diane, was a playbook on what do you do when friendships evolve and evolve in the way of thinking that you might need to spend less time with someone. How do we create that healthy distance without causing unnecessary conflict or emotional pain? And the reason I ask this is because typically, if you're doing something on a routine basis and that changes, like get spending time together, regularly spending time together, a lot of times that doesn't change unless there's been an argument or a fight, some kind of disagreement. But that doesn't have to happen, right?
Right. Absolutely. I think that sometimes organically we start to just create that distance unintentionally or maybe intentionally without like really being fully consciously aware of it. But I hear what you're saying in terms of how do you start to move away and it be, I'm
Yeah.
hearing you make the association though still with this guilt. And one of the things that I know you and I talked a little bit offline about was this idea of boundaries. And I think about like what came up for me right when you were talking about it right now was this idea of making sure that you are not trying to take care of someone else's feelings as a result of something that makes sense for you. And I say this
Gosh,
because
that's a strong point. That's hard because
it's a
aren't we
hard thing.
responsible?
Well, that's a big question.
That's a big question.
I think we're responsible for being the best versions, attempting to be the best versions that we can be, knowing that we are all flawed in some ways and will make mistakes, and that's okay. But that guilt that I was talking about, if we could recognize that it's something that, if it truly is something, we need to make sure that we're being attentive to other people's feelings in some way. We're not inflicting it on purpose. That's different than someone feeling sad that I've decided that this friendship, we just aren't, again, in the same space in our life. We're not in the same season. We don't align on the same. I mean, I'm not going to go all the way into it, but like political value, like political thoughts, religious perspectives,
Well, that's a big deal
ways we
right
raise
now,
our
right?
children.
What I do appreciate are friends of very different political values. That's where we are right now. We are in this political season, that they don't let that interfere with their friendship. But that's not always the case.
Exactly that. And I love that you mentioned that right now, because I think that that is at the crux of what we're talking about in terms of like, we're not trying to take care of someone else's feelings. It's the responsibility of both. In a healthy relationship, let's talk about it in that way. In a healthy relationship, two perspectives can exist together, and it's not a blame game. It's not a judgment. It's just a, does this make sense? And does this existence of each other make sense to continue the relationship or not? Again, going back to what I said earlier, too, is this impacting my life in a negative way or a neutral way? If it's a neutral way, I don't think that we're needing to separate. If it's impacting in a negative way, that's on me to decide that. And I'm not saying that that's the other person's fault necessarily, but it is something that I have to be honest with myself about. What you're talking about, though, in terms of like the moving away from it and it being hard and not wanting to like hurt another person, I hear that. And yet we can't always control another person's feelings, and
Sure.
really thinking through like the consequences of that. If I appease to what this person, other friendship is wanting me to do, and it isn't in alignment with what makes sense to my life, great that we're making them feel good. But what is happening over here in my emotional space, my mental space, is I am really being the one that's harmed here.
So let's put the shoe on the other foot. When we sense a close friend is distancing themselves from us, it can feel hurtful.
Sure.
How can we process these emotions, and what steps can we take to cope with the feeling of loss or that void
Yeah,
that's left in its wake?
it's a good question too. I go back to, these are such basic things that I probably become so repetitive about, but it's, how are we thinking about that separation? It is so common for people to have these misinterpretations of why a friendship ends. When we don't have an answer, like you were talking about, like it hurts to not know, when these
Right.
relationships kind of end, there isn't like a big breakup or like a very big fight or a conflict that we can point to and say, that is why we stopped
Exactly.
talking.
Yes,
If we just kind of shift away, well, we want answers. We don't feel comfortable in the unknown.
for
We are
sure.
human beings that want to know definitively what happened. And the reality is that we can't always know. What we do, though, it's a coping skill. It's a, we're trying to just resolve what this feeling is we fill in the blank. We fill in the blank based on past experiences and or our own self-perception of how we view ourselves as an individual. They stopped talking to me because I'm a bad friend, or I pick out some random thing. I cannot tell you how many times this happens with clients, where someone will say, this person stopped talking to me because I didn't say hi to them on my walk when I was walking out of the schoolyard. And I know that that's why they stopped talking to me. And I'm like, that is one instance in who knows what was going on in that person's life. Like, interesting that you've attached this specific association. And so there's a lot of assumptions get put into this that creates and amplifies this pain because we personalize it.
Of course we do. So when we don't have that answer and we're left wondering and thinking, how do we get to the point where we accept it?
This is where this idea of pausing to be very aware of this narrative that we're telling ourselves. We can't get to acceptance until we correct the narrative, is my thought on this, because I guess I can go back. If you accept that narrative in its pure form of assumptions,
When you say that narrative, what do you mean?
when I was talking about, if the narrative is Christy stopped being my friend because I didn't say hi to her yesterday, the fill in the blank that I've decided
Okay.
that is
Uh-huh.
proving that you and I have stopped becoming friends. If I
Which
go
is never going to happen, Diane.
Right, I know. Literally, it's not just it's because, she didn't say hi to me, so we're not friends. Usually people add this interesting addition of, because I'm not a good person, I'm not good enough, I'm not fun enough, I wasn't interesting enough to her, or whatever it may be. If we go to that place of accepting that reality, it puts me in a bad place, right? Because I start to feel guilty. I start to feel bad about myself. I start to question my ability to be in friendships. The domino effect of that is also, I may not try to make friends with other people because I'm scared out of my mind that the same pain is going to happen again. Does this sound familiar with relationships too? Like, in romantic relationships, when
Yeah.
they're like, oh gosh, like I don't want to date again. I'm going to get hurt, or I'm not good enough. So and so broke up with me because of blah, blah, blah. No different. So this is the unhealthy version when you're talking about like acceptance. You don't want that. And
Right.
so my
And you're right. I
encouragement,
hear that. I hear that. And
yeah,
I've even thought that, well, there's a common denominator here.
yep. And the problem with that again is it's built off of assumptions. We're not checking our facts. We're not being more realistic with what is going on in that situation. And so for me, the healthier version is being able to look and see, what are my thoughts, and can I think of different perspectives? A different perspective for that exact situation that I was just talking to you about with you and I and our friendship would be, gosh, I'm noticing that Christy is really busy. Like she's running this podcast, she's training all the time. And so her time is probably much more limited. And so it just really seems like those are the things that are really passionate for her. She's growing in this different direction. I'm not as interested in those kind of things. And so perhaps it's such that we just are kind of pulling apart because organically our lives are just different now. I can feel sad about that. I can definitely allow myself, and I encourage people to feel sad about that loss without adding this interesting narrative of, I'm a bad person. It's because of me. I'm the common denominator, like you said, why this friendship
Right.
didn't work. It's this radical acceptance of both. I've talked about this before, holding two feelings at once, right? Like where you can feel accepting and content with what is actually happening while also feeling sad and grieving. No different than grief itself. We're sad that someone has passed away, and we're
Oh,
also, in some ways, relieved because now they're no longer in pain.
that's a really great way to think about that. And I liked the phrase, I wrote that down, radical acceptance. So, all
Mhm.
those things that you talked about, the healthier way to deal with that, that takes practice, doesn't it?
Yes. So regularly with my clients, we laugh all the time about me saying this because no different than all the things that we do in life, it takes practice for us to be able to manage our emotions, to be able to manage friendships, to be able to navigate interactions in a way that feels healthy for us. I think the other thing is, if I've not had a good modeling of what that looks like growing up, it's practicing undoing the modeling and then having to learn a new way of living. We can go super basic with this. I always go to these examples that are kind of real life. If you're trying to change your diet, right? Like you have to practice being able to adjust healthy style of living with your diet. If you've grown up with a very specific diet in your life and your parents were a lot more, they just tended to have higher fat foods around, higher cholesterol, that's just what was around, and your body is in a place where it's saying, I need something different. So your doctor is recommending for you to change. You have to shift whatever that diet is into this healthier lifestyle. And it's not going to happen overnight, right? It's practicing every single day. It's being super mindful. So going back to this mindfulness and intentionality, it's being aware that this is something that you want to commit to and then practicing it every single day.
It's interesting that you talk about that because I know it's easier to go back to our habits, the way that we've been thinking and behaving all of our lives, what we grew up with. It's easier to do that than to interrupt those thoughts, interrupt those patterns, and do what you're suggesting. But that's the practice, right?
That's the practice. Yes.
And whatever we're
I
good
want
at now, we had to practice to get there. You weren't born a psychologist. You had to learn
exactly.
and practice.
Yes. I think that some people mistake sometimes people having some maybe innate strengths and it not necessarily needing to practice as much as it being a generalized everything we do must be able to be done with ease and without practice, right? And that's why I want to correct that. But like, absolutely, there's going to be certain things that maybe some people are much better at. Athletes, there's definitely some athletes that are better, just naturally better, coordinated in a way that I could never be, but they still practice. It's not like any of those Olympians that we just watched, right? It's not like they just woke up and said, I'm going to the Olympics tomorrow, right?
Right. Like they got
Even
out
as
of bed
much
and they're doing 3 backflips in a row.
exactly, even when they were identified as being someone that was great, they still had to go practice. And so no
Yep.
matter how good we are,
Mm.
there's always this need to continue to be open to this idea that we need to practice and evolve.
That is such a good point that we need to continue to practice. We're never going to be perfect at whatever it is that we're talking about that we're struggling with because it's not natural, whether it's getting to that point of acceptance, whether it's that radical acceptance, practicing that you talk about. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Another question I have is how do we distinguish between a friendship that has naturally run its course and one that still has potential if we just put more effort into it?
I think it goes back to that kind of checking in with yourself about do these relationships serve a purpose in my life? And when I say that, I don't mean it in that like it needs to be like a give or take in some way. It could be just something as not as basic. I don't mean to minimize it in this way, but like when I was talking about do our values align, is it something that I feel is important for me to continue to connect with that person? And so I think about like the reasons why I would want this friendship to continue. And as silly as it may seem, like going back to a basic pros and cons list of a
Hmm.
friendship can be a very, very valuable, very easy way to go back and forth and check to see, is this something that I feel like it's a relationship that has run its course? Again, it's more just that going back to this idea of it's natural, it's something we're routinely in, it was something that was familiar. And so that's why I kind of just continued it versus the pros are that this person really lifts me up in a way, and again, it doesn't have to be active. They lift me up in a way that helps me feel encouraged. This person helps me feel like I can be myself in my worst and in my best or whatever it may be. And it's something that I miss. And if I want to put more energy into that, and I'm seeing a two-way effort there, I want to make sure that we name this, that even if I wanted to have that relationship continue, is the effort being met on the other side as well? Doesn't have to be equal, where that person is equally reaching out to me all the time, but is there an intention for both sides to want to stay in the relationship? So I want to make sure that that's something that we're considering.
That's a very important point because I shouldn't be the only one reaching out all the time. Or if somebody's always reaching out to me and I respond, but I'm not reaching out to them, then maybe I need to check myself. Social media is such a big deal right now. Do you see that? Are you hearing that from people that sometimes social media is the reason for the end of a friendship?
Yes, I smile, unfortunately, because it is this whole idea of that whole concept of FOMO, right? This fear of missing out and again, go back to misinterpretations of what that post means. I
Oh,
was not tagged in that post. I cannot tell you
oh,
how many
wow.
clients come to me and tell me, how come I wasn't tagged in that post? Or how come I wasn't invited to that event? And this, that, and the other. It must
Sure.
be because of me or some other judgment that they have on the other person. And it is such a hard thing to have a person pull back and not personalize it. I go back to this idea of like not personalizing it and not looking at that one event as a definition of your friendship. And so this is something that I regularly work with my clients is if they'll come to me one day and they're like, Susie did not invite me to her party last week. I cannot believe that. Her and I have been friends for all these years. We see each other. We've watched our kids grow up, all this, that, and the other.
And she
And
knows I'm going to
why?
see the post, and
And
she
she
didn't
knows I'm going
invite
to
me.
see the
She didn't
post.
say,
And how could she do that? Right.
right.
there's different lines of thinking. Again,
Mm.
sometimes it's related to like Susie's a bad person, or I'm somehow like maybe she doesn't see and value our friendship the same way. And we have to really stop and pause. And I have to go back and say, one, what has your relationship been like with Susie up until this point? In some cases, it's such that, well, I actually haven't talked to Susie in a month. Okay. So you've had such a strong relationship with Susie, but you are upset. You haven't seen her in a month. You haven't talked to her in a month. Have you made an effort to connect with her? No, but how dare her? She didn't
Right.
invite me to this party, right? And so it's again checking those facts of how are you actually thinking about the friendships that you have in terms of what you were saying, what efforts have the two of you put into the relationship? Are we misinterpreting the strength of that relationship as well? I think this idea of someone being their bestie is thrown around so much, right?
Mm.
Everybody's at the level of bestie. Everybody's at the level of they are my best friend. They are my good friend. We are so close. And maybe that's not actually what's happening. So when we look at the actual relationship, how much time do you spend together? How intimate do you share details of your life together? All of those things, I think, are things that people misinterpret in terms of the level of what that friendship actually is. And so it hurts when that person doesn't come to them and invite them to all the things or they're not included in something.
So it's interesting that you say that because one of the other things I thought about preparing for this episode is we all have different definitions of what a friend is.
Yes.
I call a lot of people friend, and I mean that, but there are certainly friends that I see walking by every day that I say hello to while I'm out on my run or my walk. I call them friend. The people that I spend a lot of time with, I call them friend. But there are different definitions of friendships that are very personal and different levels of friendship. So, do you think that our perception of what friend means to me and what it means to you might be one of the reasons that we feel hurt? Because I look at you and I think, oh, you're such a good friend. And you look at me and you're like, she's a friend. She's nice. I like her. But we're not going on vacations together. Do you think there's some of that might be going on as well?
Absolutely. I love that you're bringing this up because I think it's an important one in terms of getting alignment and misalignment, and then the impact that it has if a friendship either continues or doesn't in terms of the emotional impact it has on us. And absolutely, you're right that sometimes and that's what I was talking about too, that we have this misinterpretation of who's in our front row. I think that you're in my front row, but you may think I'm in your like fifth row. And it's not
I
meant
love
to
that
be, right?
analogy.
It's not meant to be anything that is necessarily judged. I want to say it that way in a negative way, but it is a misinterpretation. And so I think it comes for me back to this idea that, like, if you come to find out that you're in the fifth row and I've held you in the first, that can hurt.
Sure.
It doesn't need to be personal, though, necessarily. Or you check that friendship. What was going on? Why is there a misinterpretation there? Is it because we really haven't spent all that much time together, or because I tend to put everybody in the front row? Is that on me that I'm putting everybody in the front row and I'm then expecting because I do that, everybody else must do that for me? And is
Right.
that a healthy expectation? And so I come back to me. I need to check my expectations of what I want those friendships to be like and what I expect of my friends. I also encourage people to be pretty open about some of these things. And those are hard conversations
Those
to
are
have.
hard conversations.
They're hard, but if you're able to get to that point of feeling confident, and it's not to attack the person, but if you're able to share, going back to intimate relationships, what your needs are in a friendship, in an intimate relationship, in a collegial relationship, you give that person the option to join in or not. You can still feel sad if they say, no, thank you, Christy. Your needs and your expectations of me are just too much. You can feel sad and be in this place. It's work. It's work to be in this place, to not personalize it and accept that that person has a different perspective, a different need, a different boundary for themselves. And that is hard,
Hmm.
Christy. I say this all the time where it's like, yeah, I'm saying this out loud and this is as easy as it is in a logical way. Emotionally, that's not an easy thing to do, but it's really about checking the misinterpretations of your expectations and what you're thinking that person should or should not do.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about something I say frequently. I started in business as a way to make sure that my customers could be open with me. I said, I commit to candor with kindness and respect because I didn't want contracts canceled and I was shocked, or somebody to be angry and not be able to say something to me, or want something different that wasn't being delivered and not say that. So I made a point to say to my customers, I strive for candor with kindness and respect. And I'd ask that of you. As I continued on in my life, I realized that's something I want to say to my children as well. My children are adult children. Like, we're not going to see eye to eye all the time. And I want you to come to me instead of just being angry at me. Let's talk about it. Does that work? Do you think that's appropriate for friends too? Is to say, I love our friendship, but I just want to say, if there's ever a time, I want us to be open with each other. But if we commit to this, then if you come to me, and especially if we've had this agreement that we're going to speak to each other with candor, with kindness, and respect when it comes to difficult situations or difficult conversations. If somebody comes to me and says, Christy, I need to have one of those conversations, then I know that you're getting ready to say something that's hard for you. And it may be hard for me to hear, but we've both agreed that this is respectful and kind. And sometimes I think, and tell me, I definitely want to hear your opinion about this, but I think sometimes when you say that or something like that, then it can really diffuse a situation. That way I don't have to be on the defensive, like, oh my gosh, she hates me, or I've done something terrible. You've got to say something to me. Again, that may be hard for you. And those are hard conversations to start. Is that an appropriate thing to say?
Yes, absolutely. I think you keep saying it and you've repeated it multiple times, and we keep saying the same thing. That's hard. It is hard to have that conversation, but do we see the benefit of it? Just because it's hard doesn't mean that it's not healthy and helpful, right? Hard things can really lead to beautiful connection with individuals. We keep bringing it back to, we're talking about friendships, but I think about it because people relate a lot to this with intimate relationships. When we're able to say that to our partner and say, like, I know we're going to have some hard conversations. I'm open to it. I want to be respectful and I want us to like talk through all the things.
Right.
That develops this intimacy even more. And again, intimacy and friendships can be the same way. What I did want to kind of go back to with what you were saying is I agree that it's great to be able to go and say this to your friend and tell them, no, I want this to be built on a foundation of respect and candor. And let's just make sure that if there's something that's bothering you, let's have a conversation. What I wanted to also mean was that the respect is not all of us are in that same emotional space, psychological space to be able to be that open also. And so for the person that's saying that this is my need, to also be willing to be open to the respect of hearing the person say, I'm not able to do that. I need to be able to have you respect my boundary of how much I'm okay to share right now. I'll get there, but I can't be as open and vulnerable as maybe you want me to be sometimes. And that is a beautiful relationship for someone to be able to say, I accept you for that. I accept you for that too. As much as I want the candor and the hard conversation and you being able to tell me, constructive feedback, I also respect you saying to me, I don't know how to do that right now. And be in that space of when the time comes, if you can respect that I need that time, can you give me my space right now and not take it personally?
Do you think this happens in real life, or are we just talking about idealistic things?
No, absolutely not. I will boast about the relationships that I have now. I love my relationships with my friends. Like they're so wonderful and that we can be so open with each other about all the different things. It's all in, I think, how we bring it up. I'm not going to come to you, Christy, and say, you better be open with me and honest and respectful. And this is what I expect of you. And if not, our relationship isn't right.
Peace out.
Exactly. But if you approach it in a way that's soft and loving and kind, and you say, I love you as a person and I respect you. And I really do honor our friendship in a way that I would love for it to continue on. I just want you to know I'm here whenever you need me. I'm here to hear whatever you need to tell me. If you're going to share vulnerable information with me about what is going on in your life, I'm going to ask you for permission to also be honest with you about how I'm feeling. How do you feel about that?
Oh
And
gosh,
they
I
might say to
love
you, I
that.
don't want your opinion. Okay, respectfully, I get that. I'm going to hold my tongue and I'm also going to like think through because I get to make the decision of maybe then I can't be the person that you tell because I love you and I want to be able to be honest too. And so again, this is when I was talking about respecting each other's boundaries. It's hearing each other's needs. It's negotiating what feels right for both. It's not one or the other directing that this is exactly how the relationship has to be. It's all about negotiation. I want to, before I lose the thought, I talked about dialectical behavioral therapy the last time I was on, and there is a whole segment. So I'm just plugging this for anyone that wanted to go in depth, and I can send you some resources about this too. But one of the modules in is skills learning for dialectical behavioral therapy is interpersonal effectiveness. And the whole thing about it is being able to have these very open and honest conversations that you and I are talking about in ways where they have three different acronyms. One is give, where I'm giving the person respect, I'm giving them all the attention, I am considering their needs and not letting myself get too caught up in what my perspective is. Then there's
Mm.
fast, which relates to like us being self-respecting to ourselves in the same way.
And what
And
was
then the
that called?
acronym
The
called
second one?
fast, fast.
Okay, fast.
I'll send you these resources. And
Please.
and then there's Dear Man, which is the combination of fast and give together. It's called Dear Man, where you're describing how you're feeling in very objective ways. You're discussing the emotion that is related to whatever is going on. You are being very honest about the action that you're wanting that person to take. You're being very respectful and you're thinking through negotiating how whatever that situation is can work for the two of you. Again, I'll send it to you. I feel like we could spend a whole section or a whole
Yeah.
segment on all of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring up and to have as resources. And I will include that in resources for our listeners. But I feel like as you're talking, I'm thinking of hashtag relationship goals, right? And most of the time when you see that, it's like significant other, but also friendship goals to be able to be that open. And
Yeah.
you would think that as you get older, that just happens naturally, but
I roll
not
my eyes at that.
necessarily. Right,
Yeah,
right.
yes. I roll my eyes only because, yes, the assumption that's the like goal is obviously for us to evolve into humans that can just naturally be that way. And then I don't want to dismiss that we are all raised differently. We're all raised differently culturally. We're all raised differently in terms of generational expectations of communication. When we think about the was modeled to us, that then spills out to how we relate to friendships or intimate partners or our colleagues or any of that, a lot of times that's from the modeling of from when you grew up. If you came from an environment where you had a more hierarchical experience, maybe a very traditional family where
Yes.
the dad was the dominant and whatever he said goes, and then the mom was maybe, a little bit more permissive, and you just had to kind of live in that. You're not going to do what you just said and express your needs because God forbid you did that and you would get like the wrath of everything on you. Right. And so this I'm very cognizant of while this is the goal, we must know where we came from and pause to make a decision of did that version of how relationships developed work? Does that still work for me in my current life? And if it doesn't, I need to work to evolve and practice to be different.
So, last question, I think. Last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I love all of this that we've talked about. Let's just say somebody listening has friends who they're struggling with. And, we're taught if you truly love someone, you accept them for who they are, right? They've had those experiences. They've grown up a certain way. They've been this way as long as you've known them. But it's to a point where that's not where you want to spend your time anymore. Do you need to accept them because they haven't heard this conversation, because they haven't learned how to practice these things that we've talked about? Do you need to just accept them for who they are, or is it time to check out?
That is a really interesting way to put it because I think that as we talk about defining what acceptance is, that relates to how we then move forward with that relationship. So I guess let me suss out what you're asking me because accepting someone for who they are and the fact that this is where they're at and they're not changing and maybe they're not going to be able to be the kind of person and relationship that is healthy for me or is in the same place as me, all of those things. You can accept someone like that. That doesn't mean that the decision is that you remain and continue in that relationship and spending time in that relationship. So I guess that's where I'm interested in your question here because that is a misconception. Just because I accept how someone is doesn't mean that I have to remain having them in my life. And going back to what we talked about, it can be degrees. Maybe I decide I accept this person, they are not changing, and I have to just be in this place of feeling sad or frustrated by it. But you know what? There are parts of them that I love and I can spend time with. Maybe I'm not having family vacations with them, but I am totally willing to still be Facebook friends with them or Instagram friends with them and still keep a like cordial relationship. Or I might decide that person is very toxic for my life. They make me feel bad about myself. They're not doing well in their life. They're constantly having like fires and crises and it's like spilling out into my life where I'm constantly trying to go rescue them and it's pulling me away from my family and I just can't. Right. And so I have to make the decision that I accept them and it hurts, but I must create distance.
I think that's very well said. So I lied. I said last question, but something I heard recently, I can't remember who said it, and I thought, wow, it was such incredible insight, very thought provoking. The statement was something to the effect that a fair weather friend is not only a person that's only there when things are good, but what about those fair weather friends that only show up when things are very bad? The rescuer.
hmm hmm What do you think about it? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, when I heard that, I could immediately think of people I know. I don't know that that's a bad thing that they're trying to be negative, but I thought that's interesting that it might be a need that they have to show up and be the rescuer because initially I heard that and I thought about somebody I know that's very much like that and I thought, well, they're a fair weather friend, but then I thought, you know what, in their mind are doing the right thing by showing up when times are hard, but
Mhm.
almost like only being there when times are good. It's important to be there in the in between times.
Agreed. And I think you're touching on something that's so important to recognize is that the reason that someone might do that could be very different reasons. It could be very much so like they've got this like internal need to constantly rescue. I see people in need. And so therefore, like I'm only going to come out of the woodworks when things are hard. And so I want to like show you and not in a negative way that like I'm there because that's just my personality is to be that
Right.
person that is the rescuer. The other version of that while you were talking was this feeling of guilt that you were also referencing earlier on as we were talking about like, gosh, like feeling like, oh gosh, I've been such a bad friend. I haven't been there for everything, but now that they're in need, I'm going to run to their rescue. So it actually is like something where I'm almost like trying to make up for all the times I wasn't there for the in
Yeah.
between. So again, all these different versions of that is something that I can think of, but it could be lots of different reasons why someone might not be there for both. But I agree with you when I think about going back to this metaphor of the front row and like the stage of like all the different friendships. When I think about my front row friends, they're the ones that are there for the good, the bad, the ugly, the in between, and kind of the times that are more the day to day for me. That's a preference, though. That's a preference. I think that's a healthy version to like think about what's the healthy version of friendship that you need for yourself.
Dr. Diane, thank you. This has been such a good conversation and something I think maybe we don't think about so much when we're adults that we have these changes in friendships and some of the things to think about, the practicing, the radical acceptance, and some of the other things that you've talked about. I think there are some real lessons here, and I'm excited to look at the dialectical behavior therapy, the stuff that you sent over. I will certainly make that available to the audience to look at. Thank you so much again for joining me on Productive Passions and helping us navigate through some of the day-to-day challenges that we face between trying to be productive and living just the life that we want to live.
Absolutely. I love our conversations. I love how they evolve into all these different things and we can connect them back to being productive in our life. I think for me, the biggest takeaways, our conversations are there are just some foundational things that we can do in our life that can help us to live these very rich and fulfilling and healthy lives. And so I love that.
Thank you, Dr. Diane, for joining us again. And I look forward to our next discussion. We'll ask people to send in what they're concerned about, what they're thinking about, or what they want to learn more about.
Yep, I'm here for it. Absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.